By the time the gavel fell, 30 people believed I had just paid $12,400 to hide evidence of a crime. The accusation began when a woman in a dark coat raised her bidder card and pointed at me. Ask him why his fiancée rented this unit under my missing husband's name. Every phone in the warehouse turned toward me. The auctioneer lowered his gavel. Ma'am, bid or step back. She bid. So did I. 900 became 3,000. Then 7. Then 12. With every raise of my card, the whispers grew louder. That's Owen Mercer, Mara's ex-fiancé, the controlling one she had to escape. At $12,400, the woman finally stopped bidding. The gavel struck. Sold. She leaned close as the crowd surged forward. You didn't buy a storage unit. You bought it. The steel door rattled upward. Inside stood a restoration cabinet painted with the name of my shop. Beside it were 2 identical suitcases and the walnut music box Mara had rejected on my workbench 6 months earlier. I had spent 40 hours making it for her. She had dismissed it 3 weeks before our wedding. Now, someone had turned it into evidence against me. A man behind me laughed. He recognizes it. I did, but not for the reason they thought. The lid carried my maker's mark, a hand-cut symbol registered on every valuable piece that legally passed through my shop. I had never marked that box. Someone had forged my professional identity into the wood. The woman stepped inside. My name is Nora Whitaker. My husband vanished 8 months ago. Mara disappeared 6 months ago. Both their names are connected to this unit. The auction manager lifted her phone. I'm calling the police. Wait. Nora pointed toward the cabinet bearing my name. A fresh padlock hung from its doors. Around us, 30 cameras were recording. If we open that, she said, everyone here may watch you become a suspect. And if we don't, her eyes settled on the forged mark. Then whoever put that lock there gets more time to decide which story the police hear first. The auction manager introduced herself as Elena Alvarez and ordered everyone behind the yellow line painted across the concrete. Most obeyed without lowering their phones. I stayed at the entrance, the receipt bent between my fingers. How do you know whose name rented it? I asked Nora. I saw the delinquency notice. A private notice? It came to my house. Her answer arrived too neatly. She had prepared for that question, just as she had prepared to make her accusation in front of an audience. And you waited until the auction to say anything. I called the facility twice. They wouldn't discuss the account. So you decided to accuse me instead. Her jaw tightened. I needed you to stop bidding. You could have told me before 30 strangers decided I was a thief. Would you have believed me? I glanced at the cameras. We'll never know. Mrs. Alvarez stepped between us. Nobody enters until law enforcement arrives. Mr. Mercer, technically the contents became yours when you paid. That does not give you permission to destroy evidence. Possible evidence. The phrase moved through the crowd faster than smoke. A young man near the auction table repeated it into his phone. Beside him, a woman enlarged a photograph of my face. The old response rose automatically. Apologize. Lower my voice. Make myself less threatening. I'm sorry this disrupted your auction, I began. Nora turned sharply. Don't. One word. Quiet enough that only I heard it. I stopped. Mrs. Alvarez studied us, then looked down at her tablet. The account was opened 11 months ago. Online. Payments came from more than one source. Whose? Nora asked. I'm not giving you financial information. You already sold him the contents, and I'm already regretting it. A siren sounded beyond the open loading doors. Nora moved toward the 2 suitcases, stopping before her shoes crossed the threshold. A red plastic seal looped through the handle of the nearest one. She read the stamped number without touching it. That came from Northline Estate Logistics. Luke's company? Her eyes flicked toward me. You know his name. You shouted it across a warehouse. I never said Luke. She was right. Mrs. Alvarez had not said it either. The name had been printed on the delinquency envelope Nora still held against her coat. I had seen it when she lifted her card, or thought I had. I tried to reconstruct the moment. Bidding, pointing fingers, the crowd closing around us. Nora watched me sail. Mara mentioned him, I said finally. When? I don't remember. That was a lie, and she knew it. 3 weeks before our wedding, Mara had asked whether my shop could receive a shipment after hours. She said a man named Luke was helping a client move several inherited pieces. I refused because the insurance paperwork was incomplete. The next morning, Mara apologized before I had accused her of anything. At the time, I had called that maturity. Two police officers entered, with a plainclothes detective behind them. The crowd became suddenly helpful, producing recordings and competing versions of what had happened. The detective, a compact woman with silver beginning at her temples, ignored them. "Helen Park," she said, showing her badge. I raised the folded receipt. "Who requested the call?" Mrs. Alvarez lifted her hand. "And who believes a missing person is connected?" Nora answered, "I do." Detective Park took us into the facility office one at a time. My interview lasted 12 minutes. I told her why I had come. Mara had stored my father's hand tools, family photographs, and several unfinished commissions there before she disappeared. I had learned about the auction from an automated notice sent to an old business email. I did not tell her about Luke's proposed delivery. Silence had protected Mara so many times that it still felt like loyalty when I used it. When I returned to the corridor, Nora stood alone beside a vending machine. The crowd had been pushed outside, though their faces remained visible beyond the loading doors. "You lied to her," Nora said. "You listened through the wall. You touched your watch when you came out." My thumb moved away from the cracked leather strap. Mara had bought it for me and later told people I checked the time whenever she spoke. "You don't know me." "No. But I know what it looks like when someone edits himself before anyone else can." Detective Park called us back to the unit. She had photographed the lock, the suitcases, and the outer edges of the cabinet. No one had entered. "This lock was purchased recently," she said. "The facility's access record shows the unit was opened 4 nights ago." Mrs. Alvarez frowned. The account was already frozen. Then someone used an active access code. The detective asked whether either of us possessed one. We both said no. She cut the padlock only after the facility attorney approved. The cabinet doors opened 3 inches before catching against something inside. A smell of cedar and machine oil reached me. Detective Park widened the gap with a gloved hand. Stacked behind the doors were furniture panels wrapped in moving blankets. On top lay a carbon copy receiving form bearing the name of my shop. My signature sat at the bottom. This time, the forgery was good enough to make my stomach tighten. Nora leaned forward, then stopped breathing. Beside my name was a second signature, hers. Detective Park looked from the form to Nora. "Mrs. Whitaker, did you sign this?" Nora's fingers closed around the seam of her coat. Outside, someone tapped on the glass and shouted my name. She did not look toward the cameras. She looked at me. "Yes," she said, "but not on that date." Detective Park did not arrest Nora. She photographed the receiving form, sealed it in plastic, and asked Nora to accompany her to the station the following morning with every document she still had from Northline Estate Logistics. Then she closed Storage Unit 214 with a police seal. My $12,000 purchase remained behind the steel door. So did my father's tools. At 8 the next morning, I unlocked Mercer Restoration and found a cardboard box waiting beneath the mail slot. Mara's things had been written across the lid in black marker. There was no return address. Inside were 3 framed photographs from our engagement party, a pair of shoes, and a stack of sympathy cards people had sent Mara after she told them she had left me. Someone had crossed out my name on every envelope before putting the cards back. I carried the box to the office without reading them. The shop occupied an old brick laundry building at the edge of town. My father had rented half of it when I was 12 and bought the whole place after 20 years of repairing cabinets no one else believed were worth saving. The roof leaked above the finishing room. The front windows rattled when trucks passed. Nothing in it had ever pretended to be more valuable than the work done there. Mara used to say that was what she loved about it. Later, she said the shop had become the only thing I knew how to love. Both sentences had sounded reasonable when she said them. I turned on the lights over the main bench. 6 projects waited beneath cotton covers, each tagged with the owner's name, condition photographs, and the date it entered the building. After Mara left, I added a second signature line to every intake form. I told my clients it was improved procedure. The truth was less flattering. I no longer trusted my own memory when another person sounded certain. At 9, my assistant, Ben, arrived carrying coffee and staring at his phone. The auction video has 40,000 views. He placed 1 cup beside my hand without asking whether I wanted to see it. "Any cancellations?" 2. "Refund their deposits." "They didn't ask for refunds." "They will." Ben pulled the cup away before I could lift it. You do this before anyone gets the chance. Do what? Punish yourself on their behalf. The words landed too close to something my sister had said after Mara disappeared, so I reached for a sanding block and checked an edge that was already smooth. At 10:15, Calvin Shaw walked in. He had taught me how to repair veneer without sanding through its history. At 71, he still wore a tie beneath his shop apron and judged people by whether they returned borrowed tools clean. His gaze went to the cardboard box in my office. More of her things? Apparently. You going to keep storing them? Until I know where to send them. Calvin removed his glasses and cleaned them with the end of his tie. 6 months is a long time to protect someone's shelf space. I pulled the cover from a walnut writing desk. The left drawer is sticking again. Genius. He let me change the subject. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. It was also one of the reasons I had remained unchanged for so long. Shortly before noon, Detective Park called. The facility's insurer wanted a preliminary inventory before deciding which objects could be released. Because I owned the auctioned contents and Nora could identify Northline shipping records, we were both required to attend. Required together? I asked. Supervised. Park corrected. Do not mistake that for trust. Nora was already outside the facility when I arrived. The dark coat was gone. She wore gray slacks, a navy sweater, and the expression of someone who had not slept but refused to advertise it. Did they keep you long? I asked. Long enough to learn that an honest answer can sound rehearsed if you've been afraid of saying it for 2 years? She held out a paper cup. Coffee. Why? Because the machine gave me 2. It was a bad lie. The facility vending machine dispensed cans. I took it anyway. Detective Park met us at the unit with Mrs. Alvarez and an insurance adjuster named Paul Denny. We were given gloves, numbered tags, and strict instructions not to open drawers or remove wrapping without permission. The fresh padlock had been replaced with a red evidence seal. Park cut it, raised the door, and began recording. In daylight, the unit looked less mysterious and more deliberate. Furniture had been arranged in narrow aisles. Labels faced outward. The 2 suitcases sat at equal angles, as if someone had staged a photograph and expected viewers to notice the symmetry. Nora noticed something else. The dust doesn't match. Denny frowned. What does that mean? She pointed without stepping closer. The cabinet has 6 months of dust along the top. Those suitcases have maybe a week. Park photographed the difference. I had spent the night wondering whether Nora's signature made her Luke's victim, his partner, or something in between. Watching her work gave me no answer. She did not perform innocence. She measured, compared, and stated only what the objects allowed. We began with the nearest row. A mahogany chair, 2 painted bedside tables, a cedar chest with water damage along its base. Nora read inventory numbers while I recorded wood species and visible repairs. She recognized transport labels but avoided explaining how. I recognized construction methods, old glue, replacement screws, and the small, dishonest improvements sellers use to make damage look like age. After 40 minutes, she paused beside a blanket-wrapped panel. You know that fabric. Moving blankets aren't distinctive. You folded every exposed edge inward except that one. The corner showed a strip of green brocade. My pencil stopped. Arthur Bell had brought a matching armchair to my shop 9 months earlier. It had belonged to his grandmother. Mara completed the intake while I examined woodworm damage beneath the seat. 3 weeks later, Arthur collected the chair after deciding the restoration cost was too high. At least, that was what Mara told me. Detective Park gave permission to remove the blanket. Underneath stood the missing chair, its back detached from the frame. Arthur's initials remained beneath the seat rail. My original condition tag was gone. In its place hung a Northline inventory card stating that Mercer Restoration had received, repaired, and released the chair 4 months after Arthur supposedly collected it. Did this pass through your shop? Park asked. It came in. It was never repaired. Nora crouched near the detached back. There's a mark under the rail. I already knew what she had found. My registered symbol had been pressed into the wood beside a date and completion number. Unlike the mark carved into the music box, this one was almost perfect. Almost. The lower corner curved inward by less than a millimeter. I kept the real stamp locked in the drawer beneath my main workbench. Only 3 people had ever known where. My father, Mata, and me. Detective Park asked the question anyway. Mr. Mercer, did you mark this chair? The apology formed before the answer. I felt it reach the back of my teeth. Nora remained beside the chair, waiting without rescuing me. No, I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. Someone made a second stamp. Detective Park did not let me touch the false mark. She photographed it beside a ruler, took an impression with forensic film, and sealed Arthur Bell's chair beneath a fresh evidence cover. By then, the insurance adjuster had stopped calling the contents of Unit 214 auction property. He called them claims. There were 23 visible objects in the first two rows. 7 carried Northline tags. 4 had inventory numbers that matched no entry on Nora's list. 3 bore some version of my shop's mark. The third was a narrow cherrywood table I recognized from a photograph, not from my workbench. It belonged to an estate in Millbrook, Nora said. When? Last spring. She gave Detective Park the date without consulting a document. Park capped her pen. You remember one table from hundreds of shipments. I remember the complaint. The heirs had accused Northline of losing it. Luke claimed the table had never been included in the estate inventory. Nora, who managed provenance records for an auction house that sometimes hired Northline, had reviewed the file and accepted his explanation. Did you inspect the original photographs? Park asked. Nora's attention stayed on a split in the table's apron. I inspected the photographs Luke provided. That wasn't my question. No. The answer made the unit feel colder. Park instructed Mrs. Alvarez to suspend the inventory. She wanted ownership records before we disturbed anything else. Outside, Nora sat on the concrete curb, with her hands tucked between her knees. The sky had turned the color of dirty wool. My coffee from that morning remained unopened in the truck. I set it beside her. This one really did come from a machine, I said. She examined the paper cup. Your lies are getting less generous. It's cold. More honest, though. She drank it anyway. For several minutes, delivery trucks moved along the service road while neither of us mentioned the table. How many times did you accept his explanation? I asked. I don't know. That sounds different from not remembering. It is. Her thumbnail pressed a crescent into the cup. Luke knew exactly how much uncertainty a record could survive. 1 missing photograph, 1 date entered late. 1 client too embarrassed to admit they had never made a complete inventory. He never asked me to approve a theft. He only asked you not to look closely. And sometimes I agreed. That was not the full confession. She arranged each sentence like a person crossing weak ice, testing what might hold. My phone rang before I could press harder. Arthur Bell did not greet me. Is that my grandmother's chair? Someone had posted a photograph from the unit. The chair appeared in the background behind my shoulder, stripped of context and wrapped like stolen cargo. Arthur. The police are documenting. Mara told me you had ruined it. The service road seemed to recede. What? She called after I left the deposit. Said you found damage you didn't want to admit causing. She refunded me from a personal account and offered to dispose of the chair. I pictured Mara at the office desk, speaking softly while I worked 20 feet away. Why didn't you call me? She asked me not to upset you. Said you were going through something. The phrase had done its work on both of us. Arthur believed silence was kindness. I believed his absence meant the matter had ended. I never damaged your chair, I said, and I never authorized anyone to remove it. His breathing roughened through the speaker. Can I get it back? I don't know yet. It was the first useful answer I'd given him. After the call, Nora stood and walked toward my truck. Where are you going? Your shop. That wasn't an invitation. Arthur's intake file will show who collected the chair. Detective Park can request it. And by the time she does, whoever entered your unit 4 nights ago may reach your files first. I nearly told her the shop had locks, cameras, and an alarm. Then I remembered Mara, still possessed keys I had never recovered. We reached Mercer Restoration 20 minutes later. Ben had gone to lunch. Calvin was in the finishing room with the exhaust fan running. I locked the front door behind us and found Arthur's paper file in the completed work cabinet. The original intake form was there. The release page was missing. Nora inspected the folder edges. Something was removed. I can see that. I'm not criticizing you. You've been in my shop for 40 seconds and already found another hole I missed. She closed the folder. Then be angry. At you? At someone. The invitation unsettled me more than an accusation would have. I opened the digital archive instead. Mara had scanned client documents every Friday. Arthur's folder contained the intake form, photographs, and an invoice marked refunded. No release authorization. Nora leaned toward the monitor, close enough for me to notice a thin scar beneath her left ear. Open the scan properties. The refund invoice had been created 4 months after Arthur's chair supposedly left the shop. Its author field read MCOLA. The printer code belonged to our office machine. At the bottom was a Northline transfer number. Nora copied it onto the back of an old receipt. I know this sequence. She took a folded inventory card from her wallet. The edges had softened from being handled too often. The card described a walnut jewelry casket collected from the Whitaker residence 8 months earlier, the week Luke vanished. It had belonged to Nora's mother. The transfer number differed from Arthur's by 1 digit. You carried that to the auction, I said. Yes, because you already knew the unit might contain your property. I knew Luke's account had paid 1 month of rent. I didn't know what he stored. But you let me think you followed a delinquency notice here. The notice led me here. After you had been tracing the number, she folded the card along its existing crease. Yes. There it was, the first clean edge of her deception. Before I could answer, Calvin entered from the finishing room and stopped when he saw Nora. Front door's locked, he said. We're checking an old file. His gaze moved from the folder to the inventory card in her hand. You're Luke Whitaker's wife. Nora went still. I had never told Calvin her name. He removed his safety glasses. A line of pale dust crossed his forehead. Mara brought your husband here once, he said. When? I asked. Maybe 9 months ago. You were delivering the Prescott cabinet. Why didn't you tell me? Mara said he was collecting packing materials. It didn't seem important. Small permissions. That was how the structure had been built. Not one enormous lie, but ordinary people accepting explanations because challenging them felt impolite. Calvin led us to the supply alcove behind the finishing room. On the highest shelf sat a shallow wooden tray used for holding carving tools. One space was empty. The missing tool was a steel graver with a hooked tip, the only hand tool in the shop capable of cutting the inward curve on the false mark. Nora reached for the shelf, then lowered her hand before touching it. Her restraint did not restore my trust. It made me want to. That was worse. Detective Park arrived before 3. She photographed the empty slot, collected the digital files, and asked Calvin for a formal statement. Then 2 officers entered carrying a court order. Until the origin of the marked objects could be established, Mercer Restoration was considered a possible processing site for stolen property. They sealed my records room. They sealed the finishing room. Finally, they placed an evidence notice across the front entrance. Ben returned while the last strip was being pressed against the glass. How long are we closed? He asked. No one answered. Across the sidewalk, Nora held her mother's inventory card against her chest. I had spent 6 months paying for Mara's version of me. Now, for the first time, other people would lose money because of it. By 5 o'clock, the evidence notice on my front door had become a backdrop. People stood on the sidewalk taking photographs beneath it. A local reporter recorded an introduction across the street. 2 former clients had parked nearby but remained inside their cars, watching as if approaching the shop might place them under suspicion too. Ben sat on the curb with his work apron folded over one knee. Go home, I told him. Are we being paid? Yes. For how long? I checked the balance in the operating account before answering. Payroll would clear on Friday. The following one depended on 3 clients who had already stopped returning calls. This week, Ben nodded once. He did not ask me to promise more than I knew. Nora stood beneath the shop awning while rain darkened the shoulders of her sweater. She had called a rideshare twice and canceled both times. You don't have to stay, I said. Neither do they. She meant the cameras. A black sedan stopped beside the curb. Mara stepped out. For 6 months, I had imagined seeing her in grocery store aisles, airport lines, and every unfamiliar car parked across from my apartment. In those versions, she was thinner or ashamed or ready to explain. The real Mara wore a cream-colored coat I had never seen and paused long enough for the reporter to recognize her. A man carrying a leather portfolio emerged behind her. I knew him from the letter that ended our engagement without using the word ended. Elliot Vance. Her attorney. The reporter crossed the street at a run. Miss Cole, have you been in contact with police? Mara looked toward the sealed shop, then at me. I came back because people deserve the truth. Phones rose around us. Nora's hand caught the edge of the awning post. She knew, she said. Knew what? That the shop would be closed today. Mara walked toward us without hurrying. Elliot kept half a step behind, close enough to make every sentence look advised. Owen, she said. My name sounded gentle in her mouth. That was always when I had been most careful. Where have you been? Elliot lifted one hand. We're not discussing Miss Cole's location. Then why are you here? Mara faced the reporter instead of me. Because Owen has spent months allowing people to believe I abandoned him. I left because I no longer felt safe. The word moved across the sidewalk. Safe. It turned missing keys, separate bank accounts, and every unanswered message into possible evidence. It did not need a specific accusation. The audience supplied one. My sister Diane pushed through the gathering crowd. Calvin followed her from the parking lot, still wearing the dust-streaked clothes he had worn inside the shop. Arthur Bell stood near the reporter's van. Mrs. Alvarez had arrived with Detective Park to deliver an additional property notice. More than enough witnesses. Mara looked at Nora. And now I understand why he was so determined to find that unit. Nora stepped away from the post. Don't. Elliot opened his portfolio and removed a photocopy. Is this your signature, Mrs. Whitaker? He held up the receiving form from the cabinet. Detective Park's voice cut across the sidewalk. Where did you obtain that? It was provided to my client before she left. The date and signatures were visible even from where I stood. Nora could deny the document and be proven dishonest, or admit the signature and give Mara the sentence she wanted. Answer him, someone called from behind a phone. Nora's lips parted. Nothing came out. Mara gave the crowd a sad, reluctant smile. Luke told me Nora and Owen were working together. I didn't want to believe him. You never met me, Nora said. No, but my fiancé did. My fiancé, not former. The correction rose inside me, small and useless. Mara continued. Owen controlled every business record, every delivery, every dollar that came through the shop. Nothing happened there without his approval. Ben stood from the curb. That's not true. The reporter turned his microphone toward him. Mara's expression softened. You work for him. I understand why you're afraid. With one sentence, she transformed his loyalty into evidence of mine. Ben looked at me, waiting for permission to continue. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted Nora to leave before her face became permanently attached to mine online. I wanted to apologize to Diane, Calvin, Arthur, and everyone whose name had been pulled into the street. The familiar words assembled themselves. I'm sorry this happened because of me. My mouth opened. Nora struck the metal post once with the flat of her hand. The sharp sound broke the rhythm Mara had built. Ask her about the furniture, Nora said. Elliot raised the photocopy higher. Before we discuss my client, perhaps you should explain why your signature appears beside Mr. Mercer's. Nora's face lost color. She had tried to step into the story and found the trap waiting. Mara turned to me. You always said if I left, you would make sure no one trusted me. I never said that. Not in those exact words. Then don't put quotation marks around it. The crowd quieted. Mara had expected an apology or anger. The plain correction gave her neither. For a fraction of a second, her eyes moved to Elliot. Then the sadness returned. This is what he does. He makes you defend every word until you're too tired to speak. Diane reached my side, but did not touch me. Owen, she murmured, maybe don't do this here. She chose here. That doesn't mean you have to. It was the advice my family had given for years. Let the loudest version stand until everyone went home. Detective Park stepped between the cameras and Mara. Miss Cole, you are connected to an active property investigation. You need to come with me. Elliot answered before Mara could. My client returned voluntarily and will cooperate through counsel. Then cooperation can begin now. Park turned toward the reporter. Stop recording the document. It may contain protected investigative material. No one stopped. Mara drew her coat closed. I have nothing to hide. Nora made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. Mara heard it. Her careful expression tightened. You signed the form, she said. Too quickly. Too personally. Nora met her gaze. You seem very certain about what I signed. Elliot touched Mara's elbow. The small movement warned her more effectively than words. She stepped back. Across the street, another car arrived. Calvin's oldest client, Margaret Prescott, climbed out with her son. They had trusted my shop with a federal period cabinet valued at more than the building around us. Margaret carried her original receipt. "I want my cabinet returned," she said. "It's in the finishing room," I told her. "The police have sealed it." Her son positioned himself between us. "We're not leaving it in a suspected theft operation." Calvin approached them. "I've worked on that cabinet personally." "Then you should have protected it." The sentence hit him. Not me. Calvin removed the shop key from his ring. For one hopeful second, I thought he meant to offer it to Detective Park. He placed it in my palm. "Call me when you know what this place is," he said. The cameras captured that too. My teacher walked away while Mara watched from beside her attorney. She did not smile. She did not need to. By nightfall, the clip that spread fastest would not show her accusation, Nora's trapped silence, or the instant Mara answered too quickly. It would show Calvin returning his key. The first object I carried out of Mercer Restoration was Mara's box. Detective Park allowed me 10 minutes to collect personal belongings from the unsealed office. I left my father's photograph on the wall, my spare clothes in the cabinet, and 17 years of appointment books behind the evidence tape. The box came with me because I could no longer stand the sight of her name inside my shop. Rain had emptied the sidewalk. Only Nora remained beneath the awning, holding a folded paper towel against her palm. Blood had soaked through it. "What happened?" She opened her fingers. A shallow cut crossed the base of her thumb. "The metal post? You hit it with an open hand?" It seemed less dramatic at the time. The nearest place Detective Park would let us enter was the narrow break room behind the office. It had one table, two mismatched chairs, a utility sink, and a refrigerator that made a knocking sound every 40 seconds. I set Mara's box beneath the table and opened the first aid kit. Nora held her hand over the sink while I cleaned the cut. "This is going to sting." I changed the date. I stopped with the antiseptic pad against her skin. She did not pull away. "On the receiving form," she continued, "the original date was May 8th. Luke asked me to change it to June 12th. Why? A shipment had left an estate before the probate release was signed. If the real date stayed in the record, Northline could lose its license, and Luke could be charged. Did you know what was in the shipment? 3 pieces of furniture. That's what he told me. Did you check? No. The refrigerator knocked behind us. I wrapped gauze around her palm, tighter than necessary, then loosened it before she had to ask. You signed a false document. Yes. And yesterday, you called it an administrative mistake. Because that description let me remain the kind of person who would never help someone steal. Her voice stayed level, but the tendons in her wrist tightened beneath my fingers. I told myself the furniture belonged to the estate either way. I told myself the release would arrive. I told myself Luke was careless, not dishonest. How long did that work? Until the first complaint. The cherrywood table. She had known more at Unit 214 than she admitted. Not enough to understand the whole scheme, perhaps, but enough to recognize its shape. I taped the gauze in place and stepped back. When did you learn about Mara? Nora lowered her bandaged hand. 9 months ago. The answer removed the remaining air from the room. Before Luke vanished. Yes. Before my wedding. Yes. She took the inventory card from her wallet and placed it on the table between us. I found Mara's name in Luke's mileage log. 3 trips to Mercer Restoration. 2 to the storage facility. I followed him here one night and saw her meet him in the alley. You were outside my shop? Across the street. Did you see me? You left 10 minutes before Luke arrived. My hands rested against the edge of the sink. The metal felt cold through my palms. You could have walked inside the next morning. I could have. You could have called. I could have done that too. But you waited until the auction and accused me in front of 30 people. Her eyes dropped to the card. I didn't stay silent only because I was afraid of Luke. There it was, the sentence she had been avoiding since the warehouse. Part of me wanted you to be involved, she said. If you were, then I wasn't the only person who had lived beside this without seeing it. And if you had helped them, I could hate you instead of admitting what I had helped Luke become. I turned off the faucet, though neither of us had used it for several minutes. That's why you drove up the price. I needed the jewelry casket. My mother left it to me. Luke took it after an argument because he knew I would follow it. So, the unit was never about warning me. Not at first. She did not soften the answer. I came to recover the casket and whatever records Luke had hidden. When you appeared, I thought you were there to destroy them. You chose the version of me that was useful. Yes. The word hurt more because it arrived without defense. Mara had done the same thing with greater skill. She had selected one trait, my caution, my need for order, my reluctance to argue, and built a man around it, whom strangers could condemn. Nora had needed only a few minutes to use that man. I sat in the chair nearest the wall. Do you know what I told Detective Park? Nora waited. I told her Mara stored family property in the unit. I didn't tell her Mara once asked me to accept Luke's shipment after hours. Why not? Because every time I remember something that makes Mara look guilty, I hear her telling me I'm rewriting the past to punish her. The admission sounded smaller than Nora's confession. It was not. Arthur lost his chair because I accepted her explanation. Calvin lost faith in the shop because I made avoiding conflict everyone else's problem. Ben may lose his job because I kept confusing silence with restraint. Nora sat across from me. You didn't steal those things. No. But I made it easy to use my name. She reached toward my hand, then stopped with her fingers above the table. That isn't the same as giving permission. I know. Saying it aloud felt unfamiliar. The refrigerator knocked again. Rain moved softly across the small window above the sink. Nora's unfinished gesture remained between us until she withdrew her hand. I'll give Park everything, she said. The altered records, Luke's logs, my messages with him. Even if you lose your job, especially then, that doesn't undo what you did. I know. No plea followed. I noticed a drop of water caught in her hair near the scar below her ear. She noticed me noticing. Neither of us moved for a breath. The distance between the two chairs was narrow enough to close without standing. Nora's bandaged hand turned palm upward on the table. I wanted to take it. Wanting something from her felt dangerously close to forgiving her before I understood what forgiveness would cost. I stood instead. Not tonight. Her fingers folded slowly. Because you don't trust me? Because I might. That answer reached her. She looked toward the rain, rather than asking me to make it easier. I lifted Mara's box from beneath the table. Nora rose as well. Where will you go? My sister has a spare room. Will you tell Park about the shipment? Yes. Will you tell her I followed Luke here? You will? She nodded. At the door, I handed her the first aid kit. Keep the bandage dry. Is that forgiveness? It's gauze. The corner of her mouth moved, but the smile did not fully arrive. I opened the door and found Detective Park waiting in the corridor. She carried a clear evidence sleeve containing a document I recognized from the auction. The original receiving form. Mr. Mercer, she said, I need your keys. Then she turned the sleeve toward Nora. The date had been altered exactly as Nora confessed. But beneath the carbon sheet was a third signature neither of us had seen. Mara Cole. Detective Park took my keys in the hallway behind my own shop. Not just the front door key, the office key, the records room key, the finishing room key, the small brass key to the drawer beneath my workbench where the real maker's stamp was supposed to be safe. Each one went into a separate evidence bag. When she reached for the last key, my hand closed around it by habit. Park waited. It opens the old cabinet in my apartment, I said. Anything business-related inside? Receipts. Tax files. Mara's wedding binder. Then I need it. The ring felt lighter when she handed it back. One apartment key remained. One truck key. Nothing that proved I had built anything worth trusting. Diane picked me up 20 minutes later because my truck was still parked behind the police tape. She drove without asking questions until we reached her house. A narrow blue duplex with children's bikes on the porch and one spare room above the garage. You can stay as long as you need, she said. The room contained a folding mattress, clean towels, and a nightstand covered with stickers my niece had not quite managed to peel off. I placed Mara's cardboard box in the closet and shut the door. Diane saw it. You brought her with you? I brought what Detective Park let me take. That isn't the same thing. I had no answer that would not sound like defense. The next morning, the bank froze Mercer Restoration's operating account for review. The email used neutral language. Temporary restriction. Risk department. Third-party inquiry. I read it 3 times at Diane's kitchen table while her sons argued over cereal. Payroll was due in 4 days. Ben texted once, "Don't pay me before yourself." I hated him for being kind about money I did not have. By noon, 3 clients had formally requested the return of their pieces. One message came from Margaret Prescott's son through an attorney. The subject line read, "Demand for immediate release of property." The finishing room was sealed. Nothing could be released. At 2, Elliot Vance sent a letter. Diane printed it at the library because my laptop had become too slow to open attachments without sounding like it was grieving. The letter was addressed to all relevant parties. Mara Cole, it said, had returned voluntarily to assist the investigation into a fraudulent storage operation involving Mercer Restoration and third-party logistics personnel. She was prepared to clarify that she had not benefited from any stolen property, provided I signed a statement acknowledging that I alone controlled the intake, marking, storage, and release procedures of my shop. Diane read the paragraph twice. She's not asking you to confess to theft. No, just to build the room where theft could stand. That sounds like a lawyer sentence. It is. She'll say you were responsible for the system. She already did. Diane set the letter on the table and smoothed it with both palms. Can you survive not signing it? The honest answer was not heroic. I don't know. That afternoon, my own attorney, Harold Finch, called from his car between appointments. Do not sign anything. Do not speak to Miss Cole. Do not speak to Mr. Vance. And keep distance from Mrs. Whitaker. She has documents. Documents can be transferred through counsel. She's being investigated too. That is exactly why you keep distance. After the call, I stood in Diane's laundry room and stared at detergent, paper towels, and birthday candles. Other people's order could make your own collapse look louder. Nora called at 6:13. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered the missing graver, Mara's name under the carbon sheet. And the way Nora had said yes, without asking me to soften what it meant. I answered, I'm not calling to explain, she said. Good. I was suspended. The dryer clicked behind me. From the auction house? Pending review. My supervisor said altered provenance records make me a liability. I'm sorry. Don't use that word for something I did. The correction was deserved, she continued. Park has copies of Luke's mileage logs. I'm giving Harold the originals tomorrow. He can give you what he thinks you should see. Why tell me? Because I won't let you learn it from another envelope. We met the next morning in the county records parking lot because Harold refused to let either of us come to his office at the same time. Nora arrived first. She stood beside a dented silver sedan with a banker's box on the hood. Her bandage had been changed, clean and wrapped too neatly to be accidental. You did that yourself? I asked. I watched a video. Risky legal strategy. Medical, not legal. It was the closest either of us came to smiling. She lifted the lid from the box. Inside were mileage logs, printed inventory cards, copies of complaint letters, and a narrow blue folder tied with string. My mother's casket isn't in there, she said before I asked. But the transfer numbers around it are. Harold should take it. He will. She did not push the box toward me. She had learned that evidence could become pressure in the wrong hands. A cold wind moved loose papers across the hood. We both caught them at the same time, our fingers landing on opposite corners of the same page. Neither of us let go for a second. Then Nora released hers. Owen, don't. I wasn't going to apologize. What were you going to do? Tell you I wanted to call last night for a different reason. The parking lot seemed too open for the sentence. I folded the paper and placed it back in the box. I wanted to answer for the same reason, I said. Her eyes stayed on the folder string. That would be a bad idea. It would be an easy one. The distinction mattered. Easy was what Mara had taught people to expect from me. Easy to shame. Easy to silence. Easy to use as proof because I would rather absorb blame than make a scene. Nora had her own version of easy. Easy to turn guilt into service. Easy to confuse being useful with being forgiven. I rested my hand on the box lid without closing it. If anything ever happens between us, it can't start in the wreckage they made. She nodded once. No rescue romance. No hiding place. No revenge. No pity. The list should have felt cold. Instead, it gave the moment a floor. Nora reached into her coat pocket and removed a small brass object wrapped in tissue. For 1 second, I thought it was my missing graver. It was a key. Luke's storage key, she said. Different facility. I found it taped behind a drawer in his desk. Did you tell Park? She's meeting me there at 3. Then why show me? Because I'm done deciding alone what you deserve to know. She placed it back in her pocket before I could touch it. Harold arrived in a rust-colored sedan and took the banker's box from Nora without letting us discuss anything else. He told me the account freeze might last weeks. He told Nora not to contact me directly again unless law enforcement required it. We both said we understood. Neither of us promised. At home, Diane had made soup and left my niece's drawing on the folding mattress. It showed my shop with yellow tape across the door and a sun above it because children were generous with weather. My phone rang as I was taping the drawing to the wall. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. A man breathed once on the other end. Owen Mercer? Who is this? You want your shop back? My grip tightened around the tape roll. The man gave a small laugh. Tired and familiar, from a voice I had only heard in other people's stories. Then you and I need to talk before Nora tells another version of what she did. Luke Whitaker paused. She's not the witness, Owen. She's the way in. Luke chose a diner 20 miles outside town, not because it was hidden, because it was ordinary. Retirees ate pancakes under framed photographs of local baseball teams. Trucks idled beyond the windows. Nothing about the place looked like somewhere a man returned from disappearance to ruin a woman he had once married. Diane drove me there and refused to leave the parking lot. If he gets in your truck, I'm calling Park. He won't get in my truck. If you get in his, I'm calling Park and Mom. Mom's been dead 12 years. She'd still answer for this? The diner bell rang before I could answer. Luke Whitaker entered like a man who had learned to look unimportant. Gray hoodie, baseball cap, no wedding ring. His beard had grown in unevenly, and one side of his mouth carried a healing split. He slid into the booth across from me without ordering. You came alone. My sister is outside. He glanced toward the window. Luke smiled. Family loyalty. Dangerous thing when people don't understand the file. I placed my phone face up on the table. I'm not recording. That would make one of us polite. He reached into his hoodie and set a sealed envelope beside the sugar dispenser. Inside was a draft affidavit. I did not touch it. Luke leaned back. It says you had no knowledge of the altered transfers. It says the forged marks were created by someone with access to Northline records and Mercer's intake system. Nora. It says Nora Whitaker. Coordinated access. She didn't. You sure? The waitress arrived. Luke ordered black coffee. I ordered nothing. She left with the uneasy efficiency of someone who had heard one sentence too much. Luke opened the envelope and turned the last page toward me. My name appeared beneath a blank signature line. If you confirm she approached you before the auction, if you confirm she knew where the casket was, if you confirm she had the paperwork all along, I give this to your lawyer. That clears you too. It clarifies roles. It lies. He tapped the page once. It separates you from her. That's what you need. Behind him, the television above the counter played the local afternoon news without sound. A photograph of my sealed shop filled the screen. The caption underneath read, Restoration owner. Under review in property theft case. Then the image changed to Nora's employee badge photo. Luke watched my face instead of the screen. They're going to put her at the center whether you help or not. At least this way, you get your shop back. My phone vibrated. Harold. I answered. Where are you? He asked. In a diner. Please tell me that means lunch. Luke's here. Harold swore with professional restraint. Do not sign anything. Do not accept anything. He has an affidavit. Of course he does. Leave. Can it help the shop? The pause that followed said more than his warning. It could help you, Harold said. At a cost you may not want to pay. Luke heard enough to smile. I ended the call. The diner bell rang again. Calvin walked in. For a moment, he seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see him. Then his eyes moved to Luke, and his expression closed. Luke lifted 2 fingers in greeting. You two know each other, I said. Calvin came to the end of the booth but did not sit. He called me this morning. Why? Because I saw him at your shop 9 months ago. Luke stirred his coffee, though he had not added sugar. Mr. Shaw misunderstood the timing. He has agreed to correct it. Calvin's jaw shifted. He said if I didn't, Margaret Prescott's attorney would name me personally for mishandling her cabinet. There it was. Fear. Dressed as paperwork. You were going to change your statement? I asked. I was going to ask Harold what it meant. You could have called me. Calvin's face tightened. I gave you 40 years of my reputation. Yesterday people told me I had spent it covering a theft. The sentence cut cleaner because it was partly true. Mara had not needed everyone to betray me. She only needed them tired enough to protect themselves. Luke slid the affidavit toward Calvin. Tell him what a smart man does when a building is on fire. Calvin did not touch the paper. A smart man checks who lit it. His answer surprised Luke. It surprised me more. Luke's smile remained, but it arrived late. Careful, he said. Your name is in more files than you think. Calvin looked at me. I'm not changing my statement. He left before either of us could answer. Luke's fingers curled around the coffee mug. That was the first crack in him. Not rage, but calculation missing a step. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Nora. I did not answer. Luke noticed. She's good at that. Making you feel cruel for protecting yourself. Don't talk about her like you know what protection is. I know she altered the date. I know she followed me. I know she found the storage key. I know she didn't tell you until it made her look honest. Each sentence had enough truth inside it to be dangerous. My thumb hovered above Nora's missed call. The old reflex returned in a different costume. Not apology this time. Suspicion. Maybe Nora had held back another piece. Maybe she had shown me only what made her useful. Maybe the easiest way to survive this was to stop choosing between people who had already used me. Luke lowered his voice. Mara said you were loyal in the stupidest way. She said you'd defend a person just because they admitted one sin before you found the rest. Mara's name changed the temperature of the booth. What did she say about the blue suitcase? Luke's mug stopped halfway to his mouth. What blue suitcase? He said. Too flat. Too clean. You tell me. His eyes went toward the window. Not to Diane. To the dark sedan that had pulled in beside her minivan. Mara sat behind the wheel. She should not have been there. Luke recovered quickly. There were 2 suitcases. I didn't say there were 2. No, but everyone saw the footage. The footage didn't show the false bottom. His face changed. Only for a second. Enough. The diner door opened, and Mara stepped inside with Elliot Vance behind her. She had dressed for court, though no hearing was scheduled. Cream blouse, navy coat, hair pinned back, the costume of a woman who had come to be believed. Owen, she said. Diane appeared behind the glass, already on her phone. Mara's gaze moved to the affidavit. Don't let Nora make you carry this for her. No one had said Nora's name since Mara entered. Even Luke turned slightly. Elliot touched her elbow. Mara's smile came after the fear this time. I mean, she corrected. The waitress froze beside the pie case. A cook looked through the pass window. 3 strangers in vinyl booths watched a woman revise herself in real time. The room was not hers. I picked up the affidavit and folded it once. Luke leaned forward. Think carefully. I am. You sign nothing. You lose the shop. Maybe. You defend her. You go down with her. I'm not defending her. Mara's eyes sharpened. I tore the affidavit in half. Then again. The sound was smaller than I expected. I'm telling the truth about all of us. Luke stood so fast his mug spilled across the table. You have no idea what she opened. Mara whispered his name, but he was already speaking past her. The first transfer wasn't even Mara's idea. Elliot said, Luke, too late. The cook stepped out from behind the pass with his phone raised. Detective Park entered behind Diane. I did not feel brave. My hands shook under the table where no camera could use them. But when Nora called again, I let it ring. Not because I believed Luke, because the next truth had to be told clean, not through panic, not through rescue, not through the wreckage they had made. Detective Park did not let Luke finish the sentence in the diner. She did not arrest anyone there either. She collected the torn affidavit, the coffee-stained page, and the names of every person who had heard Luke say the first transfer was not Mara's idea. Then she gave the lawyers 48 hours to produce records before she started serving warrants. 48 hours was enough time for Mara to release a statement. It said she had returned to protect innocent property owners from a scheme that used her name, her grief, and her broken engagement as cover. It said she had been manipulated by a man who controlled a restoration shop and by a woman desperate to hide her husband's crimes. She did not name Nora. She did not have to. Park later confirmed Luke initiated that first altered transfer. Mara turned his shortcut into a system. On Friday morning, the county property warehouse opened one conference room for an ownership review. Harold reminded me it was not a trial. Do not perform, he said. Do not argue with Miss Cole. Answer Park. Answer counsel. Let the objects speak. My objects have been doing better than I have. Then try not to interrupt them. Inside, folding tables formed a square. Detective Park sat at one end. Mrs. Alvarez, Arthur Bell, Margaret Prescott's son, and 4 other claimants occupied the wall chairs. Calvin stood near the back in a tie. Nora was already there. She sat beside her own counsel, not beside me. Her bandaged hand rested on a closed folder. Mara entered last. Luke came in behind her, but not with her. Elliot Vance noticed everyone noticing and guided Mara to the table. Park began with rules. No interruptions. No recording. Identified property would remain in custody until release forms were approved. Mara folded her hands. I understand. She sounded calm enough to be printed. Park placed the original receiving form under the document camera. The image appeared on a monitor. My signature, Nora's altered date, and Mara's name faint beneath the carbon sheet. Elliot spoke first. My client's name appearing on a carbon layer proves only that someone placed a document above an unrelated form. Nora's counsel opened her mouth. Nora touched her sleeve and stopped her. I changed the date, Nora said. The room tightened. I did it because Luke asked me to hide an early transfer from an estate before probate release. I did not know the shipment would be used to launder stolen property. That does not make what I did harmless. Luke stared at the table. Mara watched Nora with careful pity. That is exactly what Owen does, Mara said softly. He gets women to take responsibility for mistakes he designs. Harold shifted in his chair. I kept my hands on the folder in front of me. Park turned to me. Mr. Mercer, explain your maker's mark. Not defend yourself. Explain. I removed 2 photographs. The real mark from a Prescott cabinet leg and the false mark from Arthur Bell's chair. My stamp is hand-cut steel. It leaves pressure unevenly because the lower left tooth is deeper than the rest. The marks from Unit 214 are cleaner across the top and curved inward at the lower corner. They came from a copy made from an impression, not from the original tool. Elliot leaned back. Or from a careless restorer trying to imitate his own earlier work. Careless would vary, I said. Park nodded to a technician, who placed a small evidence box beneath the camera. Inside lay the missing graver from my shop. The hooked tip had been polished bright. Luke said, that tool could have been used by anyone. No, that graver cuts the curve. It does not make the stamp. Mara's gaze moved to me, then away. I slid forward the photograph. Park had allowed Harold to copy. The walnut music box was rejected by Mara 3 weeks before our wedding. It stayed on my bench. The felt beneath it was cut away, and my mark was pressed into the exposed wood 6 times. Whoever made the copy needed a surface I had already handled. Mara smiled sadly. You mean a gift? You say I rejected? There was the old trap. Prove the private wound. And the room becomes about whether I was angry enough to lie. I left it alone. The box is not evidence because she hurt my feelings, I said. It is evidence because the false marks on the stolen pieces carry the same lower corner flaw as the impressions beneath the felt. Park changed the screen. 6 images appeared side by side, the same inward curve repeated on all of them. Nora watched the screen like a person accepting that truth could still punish her. Luke's knee bounced once under the table. Elliot moved to the next story. Even if a duplicate mark existed, Miss Cole had no access to Northline inventory numbers. Mrs. Whitaker did. Mara lowered her eyes at the perfect moment. Nora opened her folder. These are Luke's mileage logs. 3 entries show him driving to Mercer Restoration after closing. 2 show the storage facility. 1 shows the county auction annex. Luke laughed. You followed me. You wrote half those notes after the fact. Yes, Nora said. Some notes came later. That is why I gave Park the originals, not a clean version. The honesty cost her. It also made Luke's laugh sound rehearsed. Detective Park placed a blue suitcase on the side table. Mara looked at Luke before Park touched the latch. Park unlatched the suitcase. Beneath a removed false bottom, technicians had found blank Northline inventory cards and a small strip of walnut felt. Elliot stood. My client has never seen that suitcase. Mara nodded. No, I have not. Park lifted the felt with tweezers. Mara's face changed before the object reached the camera. Recognition. I turned toward her. You knew where that felt came from. I know you made a box, she said. Everyone has heard about the box. No one said the felt was from the box. Luke closed his eyes. Elliot touched Mara's wrist. Too late. Mara's voice sharpened. Because he keeps dragging that ridiculous box into everything. The word ridiculous belonged to a kitchen in winter. Sawdust on my sleeves, and the life she had decided was too small. The room heard something personal slip through a legal wall. Park asked, "Miss Cole, how did you know the felt related to the music box?" Mara breathed through a smile. "Because Owen is predictable." I closed the folder. "No, I was useful." The sentence settled differently than I expected. Not bitter. Finished. You counted on me to apologize when clients were confused. You counted on Arthur being embarrassed. Calvin being loyal. Nora being guilty. Luke being greedy. You counted on every person in this room protecting one small silence. Mara stared at me. This time, I did not give her the next word. "You counted on my silence," I said. Park placed the strip of felt beside the photograph of the music box. Then she placed the blank Northline cards beside the altered transfer forms. Luke stood. "I want counsel." "You have counsel," Park said. "Different counsel." Mara turned on him. "Sit down." The command came out naked. Not frightened fiancé. Not returning victim. Not helpful witness. Manager. Luke sat halfway, then stopped. "You said he'd sign," he told her. Mara's mouth opened. No polished sentence arrived. The claimants along the wall understood before anyone explained it. Detective Park closed the evidence box. "This review is suspended." Elliot began speaking at once. So did Luke's attorney. Harold put a hand flat on my folder, keeping me seated. Nora stood on the other side of the table. For a second, the space between us offered the old, easy ending. She had told the truth. I had told mine. And pain could become closeness because the room had shifted. She did not cross it. Instead, she handed her folder to Park. "There's one more complaint letter inside. I should have filed it 2 years ago." Then she left with her counsel to face the board that would decide whether she could work in Providence again. The fight was not over. My shop was still sealed. My account was still frozen. Mara had not confessed. Luke had only cracked. But for the first time since she disappeared, a room full of people had heard a version of me that I had spoken myself. Not clean, not complete. Mine. The shop reopened in February with 3 clients, 1 employee, and a new bell above the front door. I had not wanted the bell. Ben installed it on a Monday morning while I was photographing the underside of a maple tea table from 12 angles. "You need to hear people come in," he said. "I have cameras now." Cameras don't sound friendly. The bell gave one small, uncertain ring every time the door moved. For the first 2 weeks, my shoulders tightened at the sound. After that, only sometimes. Mercer Restoration did not return to what it had been. Margaret Prescott never brought her cabinet back. Arthur Bell did, but he stayed in the front room while I worked and asked for copies of every condition photograph. I gave them to him without making him feel unreasonable. Calvin returned his key in March. He did not make a speech. He placed it on my bench beside a tin of shellac, then picked up a chisel and corrected the angle on a drawer rail as if 3 months had been a long lunch break. "You still cut too deep when you're angry," he said. "I'm less angry." "No, you're slower?" That was fair. The bank released my account after the first warrants produced records from Luke's second storage unit. Northline's insurer began contacting claimants. Detective Park told me Mara and Luke were both facing charges, but she did not promise outcomes. "People think truth is a door," she said over the phone. "Most of the time, it's paperwork." She was right. The story online never fully corrected itself. The first videos still existed. So did the headlines. A few people apologized. More people acted as if they had always been waiting for more information. I learned not to require a confession from every person who had believed the worst version of me. That did not mean I forgot. Every new intake form now had photographs attached before the client left the building. Every drawer, underside, hinge, old repair, stain line, and hidden crack. I documented so much that Ben started calling the camera my second apprentice. He was wrong. It was not an apprentice. It was a fence. Some fences keep danger out. Some remind you that part of you still expects it. On the last Friday in April, I took the walnut music box from the locked cabinet above my bench. The false mark had been sanded away under Park's supervision after the case evidence was released. The underside still showed where the felt had been cut. One corner of the lid carried a scratch from the day Mara had pushed it back across my workbench and said it belonged to a life she did not want. I had planned to repair that scratch. Instead, I worked around it. The new felt was dark green. The hinge was brass. The movement inside played unevenly because one tine had bent during storage. I could have replaced it, but the sound seemed more honest when it caught on the fourth note and continued anyway. The bell rang at 4:20. I did not turn quickly. That felt like progress. Nora stood inside the door with both hands visible, as if she still did not want to startle anyone in a room full of delicate things. Her hair was shorter. The scar beneath her ears showed more clearly. She wore no wedding ring, and for once I did not let myself build a future from the absence of one. "Hi," she said. "Hi." A paper bag hung from her wrist. "Coffee? The machine gave you two again?" "No. I bought two on purpose." She set one on the counter and kept the other for herself. We had spoken twice since the review. Once through Harold, when her counsel needed copies of intake procedures. Once by phone, after her professional board issued its decision. 6-month suspension. Mandatory ethics training. No supervisory work for a year after reinstatement. She had taken a cataloging job at a small museum 2 counties over. Mostly basement work. Mostly unpaid overtime disguised as opportunity. "It's honest," she had said. "That's not the same as easy." No. Now she stood in my shop without a folder. Without a lawyer. Without evidence in her hands. The bell settled behind her. No cameras waited outside. No attorney lifted a document. No one asked either of us to choose a side before we had finished breathing. Nora noticed the music box on the bench. Her cup paused halfway to her mouth. "Is that it?" "Yes." "May I?" The question mattered. Not because the box was fragile, because she remembered that reaching too quickly had once been part of the harm. I moved the box closer. She did not touch it immediately. Her fingers hovered above the lid, then rested on the unsanded scratch. "You kept this." "I kept what was true." Her eyes softened. But she did not turn the sentence into something larger than it was. After a moment, she lifted the lid. The inside smelled faintly of walnut oil and new felt. "There used to be marks under here," she said. "There used to be lies under there. And now it's a music box with a bad note." She turned the key slowly. The melody began clean, caught on the fourth note, then found its way forward. Nora listened until the last vibration disappeared into the rafters. "I'm divorced," she said. "I know. Park told you?" "Small town. Small county. Small county. Ben." That brought the smile this time. A real one. Tired at the edges. "I'm not here because of Luke," she said. "I'm not standing here because of Mara." The old boundary returned between us. But it no longer felt like a wall. More like a line painted on concrete so nobody could pretend they had not seen it. Nora held her coffee with both hands. "Would you have dinner with me?" I thought about the shop. The clients who never came back. The videos that still appeared when my name was searched. The camera waiting beside every intake form. I thought about the way truth had not restored the old life. It had only made room for a real one. "Coffee first," I said. She glanced at the 2 cups. "We have coffee. Then, we're already doing well." We sat at the front counter while the late light moved across the floorboards. The music box remained open between us. Not as proof, not as evidence, not as a wound demanding attention. Just wood, scratch, song, accepted. Some people do not destroy you by shouting. They do it by writing a version of you that everyone else can believe. And sometimes, the person who helps you survive is not the person who fixes your life. It is the person who finally stands close enough to say, "No, that is not what happened." If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for the truth of your own life? And if you want more stories like this, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.